So hey everyone, this is the first video in a series of videos in which I'm talking about what is JavaScript, and let's try to understand the overview for this entire sessions. So the first thing first, we're going to be starting out the JavaScript syntax, how we can write JavaScript, and the file structuring and the code editor we're going to be using. Right, then touching upon what is values, types, operations, variables, and loops, if else, and we can touching upon the functions, closures, and finally we can covering and end this entire playlist with making a project. So this is the entire overview for this entire sessions. Let's move ahead and talk about values. So what is exactly values? Now let's move ahead and talk in more brief. So right now, if you look at this file, right, so I am be using this VS Code. So this is the VS Code we can easily install. This is essentially a code editor where you can code any other languages. Right now I'm using JavaScript, so we be using JavaScript specifically for this editor. And they also have a lot of other options. You can even install a lot of other extensions so that it's make your life more easy. So I hope that I also recommend you to install this particular VS Code extension or VS Code I would say code editor in your system as well. Cool. So now I just make a file of main.js. This file though, so the .js is essentially extension for your JS file or JavaScript files, right? And over here you will see these are the essentially types. So what are types essentially, right? So right now if you look at the first thing, so first thing first, we have number. The number can be classified into two categories. So this is a simple number. Then you have this float number, right? So right now you can just think of both of them as a number category, right? So this is essentially the numbers in JavaScript, right? So then we have the string. So just can remove this values as for now, right? So the string are essentially encapsulated into this double quotes, right? So the double quotes consist of your certain message. That would be anything, let's say hello world or any other stuff as well, right? And it doesn't even matter you use double quotes or single quotes, right? So even if you use double quotes, it's work fine, or in the single quotes it's work fine as well. And with the most of the compilers out there, when you compile your code or whenever you essentially save your code, they essentially put double quotes. Let's say we are using prettier. Prettier is essentially an extension that essentially prettify your code, so that essentially put double quotes on your string. Cool. So I also recommend you to use double quotes as it's a convention, but it's all depend upon you. So then we have Boolean. So Boolean is of two types, true and false. The Boolean is essentially named after a famous scientist whose surname is Boolean, so then we can be using Boolean. Cool. So then we have undefined and null. So now undefined and null are the most good topics to understand, right? These are the hardcore for JavaScript. So let's say I just remove this stuff as for now. So let me just have this, right? So what is null and undefined, right? So null and undefined can be categorized as when we have no values in a certain variable, we can classify that as undefined, right? But that doesn't mean that undefined and null are same. Now undefined essentially means that once you declare a certain variable but you haven't assigned a value to that, right? This is the main difference. This is the main essential definition for undefined. And the null means you just put a certain type or certain variable as null, right? That's essentially a meaning of null, right? So these are the more hardcore topics of JavaScript. Then we have arrays. Now arrays are essentially, let me just save that, right? So arrays are essentially put into this square brackets, right? So you can add the square brackets as for now, right? This is essentially arrays. Now arrays can be is essentially encapsulated into this square brackets, and this is essentially a number arrays, which is essentially consists of all the numbers. Then we have this string arrays, right? And the separator that separates one value to another is this comma, right? So they're essentially used as separator in this strings or in this arrays. Cool. The next thing which we have is an object. Now object is also pretty cool to understand. So my age is essentially, I guess, 15. So I just had to create over here, right? This is an object, right? So in the object we are essentially use this this essentially curly braces, and we essentially put all the values inside that. So right now we have this name, and we just put the name as John, right? Then we can essentially use age 30, we can use is valid to false, right? So that essentially we can use object in JavaScript. Now what's the use case of object? Now object is essentially usable when you have your multiple data and you want to pass the data in your files. Now right now this, if you want to understand in more brief manner, the object is essentially consist of a key and a value. So right now we have this key of name, and the name is of John. Then we have age, then you have 30, right? So you can easily map the data or easily essentially use the data in your files by an object. And there are a lot of other use cases for object as well. So right now, if you're a complete beginner, you don't need to worry about all the stuff as for now, right? You just need to know that what is numbers, what is string, that string should be encapsulated into this double quotes, right? What is boolean is true or false, right? And this is a simple step which you need to understand before moving ahead. So that's all. I will see you in the next one.